What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favali, super excited to be joined by a first-time guest, S. Baraheni. He covers the NBA and does it extremely, extremely well for SDPN Sports, and he is also the host of the Objective Basketball podcast, which is also over at SDPN Sports. Follow S. Baraheni at just S. Baraheni. That's at JUST. ESBARAHENI. A great follow. One of the busiest people in this business right now, based off all the content he's pumping out. He's been at Summer League. Great job covering the Raptors, the entire league at large. Like I said, first time guest. S, how the heck are you doing?
I am good. I'm glad to not be busy anymore. That's
Say that. And then
Yeah.
like Damian Lillard and Siakam
You
and
know
James
what?
Harden, all that stuff's gonna go down.
You're
Don't jinx
right.
it.
You're right. I'm gonna jinx it. I'm gonna jinx it right as soon as it happens. No, I'm glad to be on the pod. I love the little design, the aliens. I gotta ask where that comes from. Like,
We just wanted to have like a bunch of little mini Victor Wembanyama's on our
got you.
podcast, but I'm obsessed with space and I say alien shit all the time. And so
Hell yeah.
just sort of leaned into it. We had another, like, this is recent, but my podcast co-host left for vacation. So I was like, you know what? He's gone. I'm going to make this unilateral decision to lean into the
Nice.
aliens. And my wife was like, is that even on brand? I was like, not really, but I think it looks fun.
I like it. I like it. It adds a cool spin. And yeah, little tiny Victor Wembanyama's just all over the thing. I like it.
That's how we'll spin it now. Is that's
Yeah.
what the aliens are for. You survived Summer League. You told me 5 days. That's a lot. That's a lot of Summer League. So
It is, man.
kudos to you.
It is. I wouldn't recommend 5 days for anybody. Honestly, even if you're covering the NBA, I think 5 days. Salute to the people. I've seen people who are still there. They're like leaving right
They're setting
now.
between like 11 days or 12 days in Vegas.
Yeah.
I survived it.
I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you did it. I commend you. I salute you for the fact that you got there for 12 days. I could never do it. No way.
What is it still like after 3 days? Like everybody's gone, right? Is 3 days still the sweet spot, or have they extended it to 4? Is it just 2?
I think it's like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then there's people who will linger for the Sunday, and then you're off by Monday for sure. You know what I mean? But I stayed that extra Monday, and I regret it. It was tough. Don't do that.
What do you think happens to the people that like just left, were there for the whole thing?
Exhaustion.
Part of their soul is dead, right? It's
Yeah,
just like,
yeah. Well, just like talking to some of the people from the Raptors who were supposed to stay there, I believe till yesterday. It was such a long and enduring process, and I was asking them like, how do you just stay fresh? How do you stay into it? And they're like, man, you just got to keep your head down, keep working. That's the only way to stay into this in Las Vegas, because you could get lost in Las Vegas. Genuinely, you can lose a sense of reality in that city. It doesn't make a lot of sense, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like you can, depending on where you are, you're not gonna know what time it is. There's just very little windows when you're going inside buildings, depending on what buildings you're in.
I will say the watching basketball on Pacific time, greatest thing ever invented.
I covered a conference finals in Mountain Time, and I was just like, this is glorious, because we're both on.
Seems great. Yeah,
we're both on East Coast time. It's like we understand. And then when West Coast people come out here, I was in the BR offices the other day, and they were kind of complaining, and I was like, you guys get to go home, like to your Pacific time zones.
Yeah.
Mountain Time's like the sweet spot though, where it's like, okay, they don't start too early. Cause I get if you're West Coast and these games are starting at 4, like if you work, they start at 5. And they're just like the late game is over by like 11, 12.
Yeah.
Like, it's glorious.
Exactly. You could sleep early if you want to. You can still go out if you want to. There's just a million and one different options on the West Coast that our Atlantic coast, we don't get that. We just don't get it.
So yeah, I second you on that. Brought you on to talk about a lot of teams no one is talking about, but we're going to begin with a team right now that everyone is talking about for a litany of reasons, the Toronto Raptors. I have to start just here, just given the way everything's played out, FEV's free agency and then the current Siakam rumors. Is this a situation where this team is actually having this existential crisis of direction, or is there more, like, do they understand what direction they're headed in more than it seems publicly?
I think they've been fighting a current for a really long time. For the last couple of years, they've been fighting the inevitable, which was that they would have to, at some point in time, make a decision on what they want to do. We've talked about like the 2 timeline experiments around the league and how failed they usually are. Like Portland was trying to for like 5 days, and that didn't work out. Golden State tried it for a few seasons. That hasn't worked out. They clearly are going a different direction now. But with Toronto, as soon as they drafted Scottie Barnes, it was like, okay, there is this 2-direction timeline that they are trying to uphold, continue, whatever you want to use. And they've been fighting a current ever since, especially because money-wise, Pascal Siakam is a free agent in 2024. OG Anunoby has a player option, but he will absolutely be opting out of that player option. He'll be a free agent in 2024. So they've just been fighting this current of, yes, we can keep this team competitive, all while this team is becoming extremely expensive. And I would say they've sort of tricked themselves into believing this team is better than it is. In last year's trade deadline, they kind of swapped first round picks in order to swap Goran Dragic for Thad Young. And then last year, they traded for Jakob Poeltl with a first round pick. So they've sort of bought into the idea that we're trying to win now and we're trying to do this and get to another level playoff wise. But they're also fighting the current of, this is too expensive. They can't really keep this up. And also trying to blend the young guys and then the old guys who are trying to compete. It seems to never work out in the NBA unless you're the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah. And I was pretty bullish on them entering last season.
I think a lot of people were,
It does feel like, and Masai Ujiri is still one of the top executives in the league, maybe of all time. But like the way that Kyle Lowry, like his exit unfolded, and then now Fred VanVleet's, where you're not able to capitalize on their departures and really anyway. You have Precious Achiuwa from the Kyle Lowry trade, insofar as I did pick him to win Most Improved Player in the preseason last year. That did not work out.
I like the pick though. I like the confidence.
So that's how bullish I was on them. But now you've just had 2 mission critical players who you could have gotten, in Kyle Lowry's case, more at the trade deadline, or moved Fred VanVleet for anything at all. Like, that's a misuse of assets. Like, there's the human element of it. Like, you want them. I mean, they wanted to keep Fred VanVleet. It wasn't, we're trying to send him somewhere he wants to go. He just outright left. But like, that's a really big mishandling of assets to lose, especially FEV, who's in his prime, to lose that guy just for nothing. And you replace him with, Dennis Schroeder, who had a good year in Los Angeles, but he's just not going to bring anywhere near the level of shooting that Fred does.
No, you're right. I mean, miscalculations. I think it's just been small, tiny miscalculations that has built up to bigger and bigger ones. The Kyle Lowry trade, I think initially not trading him at the deadline was the grave mistake, especially with like what the reported offers were that were out there. I mean, it seems insane in hindsight. You can kind of, if that was the only mistake, you could take solace in that and say, okay, well, hey, they're maybe building towards something better. But then there's other smaller miscalculations, not landing or hitting the Malachi Flynn pick, which was, I believe, the 29th pick in the NBA draft. That clearly hasn't panned out over the last 3 years. And then you continue on, and it's the Thad Young trade. It's the Jakob Poeltl trade. It's these second rounders that they usually, for the last 10 years, have been able to hit on. You think of second rounders in the past from the Raptors, guys like Norman Powell, who have been able to turn into NBA players. Some of the guys that they've drafted in that realm, Delano Banton, David Johnson, et cetera, those guys just haven't worked out. And that's not to say it's like a grave mistake, but these small little miscalculations has made it so that a Raptors team that usually is so incredible at working around the margins has not been able to work around the margins. And then the bigger stuff just compounds into, like you said, just poor asset management because of the fact that you don't have anything to rely on because of those, those things that you usually could nail down. It's just, it seems like maybe there has been a little, they've kind of lost their fastball a little bit, whatever you want to say. But it's tough to look at the last 2 or 3 years of the Raptors front office decisions and say any of it was a resounding success.
And you say fighting against the current is the perfect way to frame it. And there's been like this, it feels like conflicting messaging, because you give up, like, just even look at the most recent chain of events. The top 6 protected pick for Jakob Poeltl just implies that you're trying to remain competitive. Then you go with a first-time head coach in Darko, let Fred VanVleet leave for nothing. And now, and this is my question, is what are we to make of the Siakam rumors, in the sense that, are they just worried about footing his next contract? Are they actually looking to head in a different direction where maybe they don't love the fit between him and Scottie Barnes? Are they just trying to be opportunistic? Do they know that he wants to qualify for the Supermax and they don't want to have to be on the hook for what would be like 5 years and almost 290 if he qualifies for the Supermax next year? Like, what are we to make of the idea that they are actually shopping Pascal Siakam?
So I hate to be the cop out answer, but it's a combination of all of that. And I think if you look at the Pascal situation before Fred decided to leave, I think the Raptors had every intention in the world to run it back, to just say, hey, we have a new coach. It was really, really bad with Nick Nurse last season. The players didn't mesh well with Nick. There was a lot of background stuff, behind the scenes stuff that happened with Nick that people, especially players, just didn't appreciate. So let's start anew. Darko Rajakovic, new coach. He brings in new vibes. He seems like he's a very energetic player coach, if you will. Like, you know what I mean? And I think that was the idea. It was like, hey, let's just reset the system with a new coach. Let's bring all these guys back. They were very confident that they could re-sign a Fred VanVleet and completely misread the market on what he would potentially get from the Houston Rockets or anybody else that would be able to offer money. After that, it was like, okay, we have to reassess our options and see where we're at with the rest of the team. And you look at their front court, which is Jakob Poeltl, Scottie Barnes, and Pascal Siakam. What does that front court lack? Shooting, right? Just like negative amounts of shooting. And unless there's a massive leap from Pascal or Scottie when it comes to the shooting department, like they just become 37% shooters, 40% shooters at some point in time in their careers, which is doubtful. It's hard to build around that. It's hard to say this is a core that we're investing in, especially because Scottie and Pascal operate in so many similar areas of the court. I just think that's where their question lies now. It's like, how are we going to continue not necessarily stunting the development of Scottie, but making it harder on Scottie to develop and fully grow into the player he is by doubling down on the lack of spacing, the lack of ball handling, creation, etc. They made that mistake with Pascal over the last 3 or 4 seasons. Honestly, they never surrounded him with the right type of shooting, ball handling, playmaking. They spent 3 seasons without a center and forced him to play center for a couple of those seasons.
Right.
So it's tough. Yeah. That's why we're in this situation now, you know?
Is there any element of it, just because OG's name doesn't seem to be mentioned in official rumors as often, that they're also looking at it from that perspective where it's like, if you actually want OG to develop more as an offensive player, having Siakam and Scottie Barnes, like there's just too much sort of overlap there when you're looking at weaknesses. And like, yeah, OG Anunoby spaces the floor, but he's not out there hitting like these off the dribble 3-pointers at a consistent clip.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you know, there's been the reports for over the last couple of seasons where he wants to have a bigger role. He wants to experiment a little bit more. And I think he just turned 26 yesterday. So happy birthday, OG. But it seems like there is a willingness now to go younger and have Scottie and OG be sort of the forefront of whatever you're trying to build. I just think that's where we're at with the Siakam situation. And obviously, yeah, they have mishandled 2 free agency decisions over the last 3 seasons. You said Kyle, you said Fred. They don't want to go into a third now with Pascal and potentially fumble the best player of the bunch. You know, I think he's been their best player over the last couple of seasons. They can't do that with a guy of Pascal's caliber.
What have you made of or do you have any destinations that you like for his fit that can also meet like what Toronto wants out of a package? And I think what's also an interesting discussion, I didn't put this in the outline, is I think this happens with a lot of stars that become available. There seems to be like a major discrepancy between what I think people who watch a lot of just NBA basketball at large and then individual fan bases think of Pascal Siakam's value. And I think I noticed and this isn't an insult to that fan base, I want to make it clear, but I talked a lot about the Pacers fit when that rumor came out, and they're just like, we won't give up any of the young guys. We'll give like a 1st-round pick and salary fill. And it's like, Pascal Siakam's really fucking good.
Yeah.
And it's wild to me that people still don't, like, if you don't want to be comfortable with the contract or whatever, I get it. But I've been surprised. I think some of the fake trades I've seen floated out there are what fan bases are willing to give up. Even by those standards, like we recalibrate, okay, this is coming from someone who roots for a team. You get it. They're attached to their players. Yeah. I've been sort of shocked at how little it seems like fans are willing to give up to have Pascal Siakam on their team.
He's always had that about him, though. I feel like for a very long time, Pascal has been that guy that has been extremely underrated for what he can do. I would argue over the last couple of seasons, he's been a top 20-ish player, at times top 15-ish player in the
He
NBA.
might have made All NBA. Like, it was probably down to him and Julius Randle. I don't even remember what the voting results were. Like, he was right there.
He was very close. Yeah, he was very, very close. And yeah, that would have helped him be a supermax player. It really hurt him contract wise. But I think when you look at what Pascal can give as a complementary star to your number one option, he is almost one of the most perfect pieces to play next to any massive star. He's just incredible off the ball. He can create for himself. He's grown as a playmaker, as a guy who can create shots for himself as well. He's great defensively. He can cover a lot of ground. So I just think that's a perfect type of guy to slot in. Again, insert whoever star that you want to build around, whether it's Tyrese Halliburton with the Pacers or Trae Young with the Atlanta Hawks. Those are the two that are always mentioned.
I saw Orlando sneak in there, by the way, recently. I don't get it. I'm here for it. I'll try whatever, but
they do have a lot of young guards, and I mean the Raptors need a lot of young guards, but I just don't see where that would work. Like how that would work with him, Paolo Franz, and Wendell Carter.
The spacing won't be great. Like, I know Wendell Carter Jr. can shoot, but is he going out in that trade? And I'm assuming you don't give up Paolo or Franz. Like, the spacing would still be wonky there. And Indy and Atlanta, like, you could imagine it really working. Like, with he would finally be around, like, at least in 3 shooter lineups, if not 4 in Indy.
Exactly. Yeah. I think with Indy, it's probably the most snug fit just because you have exactly what Pascal needs to operate. Multiple playmakers around him, multiple shooters, guys who can attack closeouts, who can essentially, they can bend a defense, but then also Pascal can bend a defense for them. I think a lot of that works with Indiana. Now, it just depends on what they're willing to give up, because I think the Raptors, in the draft that they drafted Christian Coloco, they were trying to get Andrew Nembhard. That was the guy that they wanted to get. And he went a pick right before, and they were like, damn, we have to recalibrate and figure out what we're going to do. So yes, I think Andrew Nembhard is a guy that they would love in any sort of Pascal deal. Now it's like, okay, what else are you going to attach to that? Obviously, I think Buddy Hield would have to work for contract reasons. They'd have to send him out. So it's like Buddy, Nembhard, maybe a couple of picks, some other salary to make it work. That's probably what you're looking at for Pascal right now, even considering the fact that he's an expiring contract, the fact that, according to the reports, he hasn't shown a willingness to re-sign anywhere. Although I think a lot of that, by the way, Dan, has to do with the fact that he could be Supermax eligible. That's the only wrinkle in this. You know what I mean?
Look, if he wants to try and qualify for that, good for him. Like, try and get your money. And look, it's not, I mean, I would argue, I think the roster is even less set up for him to succeed in a way that would allow him to be all NBA eligible. Yeah. But I mean, there's a difference between, like, even what is the extension he could sign right now? It's like 4 years and 190-ish.
Yeah, 192, I think, is what I saw last.
And then, like, so if he's Supermax eligible, it's going to be next summer, be 5 years, and I have 288.3 in my doc. So, like, if it's anywhere in that ballpark, like, maybe I'm off on the calculations there. That's a massive difference in guaranteed money.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but even if the Raptors say, hey, we're not going to give you the full Supermax, they can meet anywhere in between that 4 and 192 and that 5 to whatever, right? It doesn't have to be either or. It can be somewhere in the middle.
Right. And it's even just the thought of, okay, if you extend now, you're throwing 4 years on top of your deal. If you wait, it's just the idea of getting the 5 guaranteed seasons, even if you're not Supermax eligible, might matter to him. Right. And I'd be fascinated to see, like, what if this and I guess that's really my next question. I'm with you on Indy and the package you laid out. If I'm the Pacers and I don't have to give up Jarris Walker or Benedict Mathurin, I've made that deal 2 days ago. Yeah. I just, like, in my head, I was like, you're gonna have to give up one of those young guys. I didn't know how until you said that Toronto was, like, super high on Nembhard. And so, like, if they value him as sort of like a fringe first round type player or someone who would make an impact for them, I would give up as many picks as Toronto. Like, if I'm keeping Benedict Mathurin and Jarris Walker, even though I don't necessarily like Siakam and Jarris Walker together, Miles Turner allows you to make all sorts of different things work. So I think they are my favorite destination. Have you thought of any, like, dark horse teams that could sneak in there? I thought about Charlotte for a minute.
Okay.
Because it feels like new ownership. They're like always kind of doing wonky shit over there. And will they try and make a splash? I couldn't make it work because you're not going to give up Brandon Miller, I don't think. And their pick obligations are just so weird. And they have salary matching, but they don't have a bunch of young guys on the roster that you're going to be behind. And Mark Williams is really good. Like, he's going to block a lot of jump shots, has some mid-range touch, but just gave Jakob Poeltl $80 million. Like you don't need Mark Williams.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's funny because there's so many centers available now after the Raptors have got their center. You know, people are bringing up Clint Capella in a Hawks deal. And it's like, man, if this had happened last year, this could be interesting, but I guess not. The dark horse I would have for you is OKC. And I know OKC would never do this. They just, it's not Sam Presti's way. He's not the type of guy to go out and make that splash. I think the only time he's ever made that type of splash is the Paul George trade, right? Other than that, you know,
the track record of, well, maybe they would do it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fair enough. But I think like there is a deal there wherever what it would be. I'm not sure. Do the Thunder include one of Jalen Williams or Josh Giddey in that deal? I would be hesitant if I was OKC. I think that's like, I'm not sure. And then, you know, they have their pick capital, which is insanely good. So I don't know what the exact deal would be, but fit wise, man, OKC would be incredible.
I love that you think along those lines because I brought them up in the Damian Lillard discussion where it was like the package I came up with. You kept Jalen Williams, SGA, Chet Holmgren. It was like Josh Giddey was sent to the Spurs in a 3-team deal, and like Portland got Keldon Johnson and a pick. But OKC fans, and I'm not insulting them, we've been on a honeymoon because I've been higher on OKC than a lot of national people. Yeah. They're just like, Sam Presti's never going to do it. Why are you talking about it? We would never give up Josh Giddey for Damian Lillard. And it's just like, I understand what they're doing, but it's okay to want a team that's really good right now.
Yeah.
The profile to be really good, to be aggressive, to get even better.
And they're also ready, right? They're
ready, and we're seeing it now. They're playing like this game of roster musical chairs. Like they're starting to run. Like Trey Mann is going to be collateral. He just had like a monster summer league. He's going to become collateral damage of all this. Like you just brought in Cason Wallace. You have Josh Giddey and SGA and Lou Dort. Like the guard minutes are just going to be cannibalized pretty quickly. So I would love them to do something like that. The messaging they've sent out, which is what everyone in the comments always says. I understand what OKC is saying. It's okay for us to have our own opinion of what.
Yeah, exactly.
They would be fun. So I haven't ruled out Pascal Siakam actually just signing like an extension now with the Raptors. And so if you had to sort of rank the most likely outcomes in this scenario in terms of he either reaches free agency, gets traded, or signs an extension now, how would you sort of order those?
So I would probably say in terms of most likely is that he gets traded now. And then second most likely, I would say extension. And then the doomsday scenario is he heads to free agency. And I just think the Raptors don't want to make that mistake again. I think Fred was a really hard lesson for them. I think Kyle obviously was a scenario that they didn't think they were going to get to that point with. So I think I would lean that way if I'm ranking it. I could see an extension though. I really, really could, especially if the talks have died down with an Atlanta, with an Indiana. There's room there for them to essentially say, hey, we're going to extend you with the idea that maybe in a year or maybe 2 years that we're going to address a trade and see what happens.
Do you think he would reach a point where he would sign that extension if he's that focused on becoming Supermax eligible, or even maybe just getting that 5th year in his deal?
I think from like his perspective, if you're his agent, you probably say you don't take that extension just because of the possibility of being able to get that money. And then, like you said, there's a 5th year potentially open to you in 2024. It'd be hard to come down and say, hey, we're going to take this extension just so that we can trade you. And oh, by the way, it's probably not the deal that you're looking for. You know what I mean?
Right. And I mean, the 2024 free agency class is going to be rough.
Yeah.
Because Jaylen Brown is going to sign an extension, we all assume. So it's going to be rough. I just wonder, like, if the Raptors say, well, we're not going to give you a 5th year. And so you're going to get 4 years if you leave anyway. Like, does that, like, if I'm Pascal, I might, if they offered me the max extension, I might just sign it.
Yeah,
now,
fair enough.
Where I'm at.
Yeah, especially because you have this 1 year cushion too, so it would be you're essentially guaranteed for 5 years that way. I think that would make sense. I wouldn't be surprised if he extends, but I think just given all the reporting, everything we're hearing recently, and also just the situation around the team, the amount that they want to just start anew with Darko, with all the new staff that they've hired. I think out of their 18 coaching assistants and trainers and whatnot, 17 of them left. So they've essentially completely gutted the training staff and coaching staff. So they're trying to start new. They have a bunch of, young new guys that they're looking forward to. I think they probably want to start fresh to start the season. That is my way of looking at it. But again, who knows with this Raptors team? They always have an unconventional way of going about things.
I'd love to go more into the weeds about this team with you, except the fact that we don't really know what they're going to look like. And so a lot of it become dated. So I'll ask you the polarizing question that became incredibly controversial throughout last season and even after his rookie season. Where do you land on Scottie Barnes after year 2? What is the thing you're watching for in year 3? What's his? I know a lot of people say his shooting might be his biggest swing skill, but what else is there when you're just looking at and seeing how his game progresses from here?
I think shooting is the easy skill to look at and say this is swing skill. And yeah, I mean, when you look at the top 5 to 10 players in the NBA, most of them have to shoot at a pretty high clip and they're pretty efficient scorers. I think above shooting, scoring is the big thing with Scottie Barnes and finding different ways to score. And where does that come from? It's his ball handling. I think becoming a better ball handler in general is going to help him becoming that quote unquote point guard that he aspires to be, but also just to be able to get into his bag scoring wise a little bit more, getting downhill, being able to, take contact, use a handle and maybe just go up with it. I think he was incredible in his rookie season at finishing through contact, using and embracing contact. And these are the little things, like these aren't necessarily swing skills for him to become a superstar or whatever you want to call it. But when it comes to what Scottie can be, his potential ceiling, it's going to come down to scoring, not necessarily shooting. It's sort of like, I don't want to say it's like Giannis, but Giannis never became an excellent shooter, but he still is an incredible scorer because of the way that he lives in the paint. He's maybe the greatest paint scorer of all time, but not to that same degree. Being able to just develop a consistent way to score at the NBA level is what will make Scottie successful. In terms of like ceiling versus floor, how do I read year 2 versus year 1? It's hard not to be somewhat disappointed in what year 2 looked like, but at the same time, there was not a lot of like the way that the Raptors team looked didn't do him any favors. And I think that's part of the process of seeing what this team looks like next year, because you want to find a way to maximize his development. And last year, just that wasn't the case. I mean, him and Pascal were both working in a closet in terms of spacing. And it never really helped flourish his game. He really struggled because he was seeing so much attention. He was kicking it out. Guys were not hitting shots. And then as the year progressed, it was just, he wasn't able to, really create anything for himself. So that's where the issues lie. It was just the context of the team really helped make it even worse for him.
And when you watch him, like, I still see it. Like, when you compare year 1 to year 2, there were these possessions where it felt like he was processing everything at a quicker speed.
Yeah.
But then, like, if he was going downhill, the spacing would all of a sudden sabotage what he was doing. Or like he has the turnaround, like he has the little push shot, like it's not always efficient, but sometimes it felt overly methodical because he just didn't have like the room to work with. But they were just like there could have been games and there were just even possessions in some of his worst games was like, oh, even without the ball, he's just moving so quickly and it feels like he's making reads and processing things so much faster that I still just see it. I think it's fair to say maybe his growth was kind of halted a little bit or just be disappointed in year 2. But I look at him and I don't know that my opinion of his future has changed at all compared to what I thought of him after his rookie season, where I thought he should have been rookie of the year. Like, I didn't think that, you could have went him or Mobley is fine, but I don't think that he was. A lot of people painted this some like blasphemous decision. And I don't think my needle has moved on him at all.
I will say, I think the thing that's been really impressive about Scottie over the last 2 years, or the first 2 years of his career, is the fact that he's been so adaptable to different roles. Like his usage and his just touches every single game have consistently changed. He doesn't know what he's getting on any given night, and yet he still finds ways to impact a basketball game. Like you mentioned, whether it be through his cerebral passing, whether it be through like being a good weak side rim protector. He's been able to do some interesting things on that front too. I think the defensive side of the ball has to grow a lot still, especially on ball. But overall, I agree with you. I think that there is still tons of promise there. It's just about finding a team, building something around him that just makes sense contextually. Shooting, please. You know what I mean? I think that's the main thing everybody talks about, but it's true. Like, you need guys who are able to work and dribble handoffs, be able to be spot up shooters, be able to be catch and shoot guys, pull up shooters. Those are the type of guys that will thrive besides Scottie Barnes. It's sort of similar to Domantas Sabonis and the Sacramento Kings. It's like the Kings now have this cerebral big man who can work and dribble handoffs, be this creator for you. But also you need guys to be that second part of that, which is the shooting, which is the downhill actions that De'Aaron Fox gets into. Like, all this stuff is required to make Sabonis look like an all-NBA player last season. So, yeah, I don't know.
That's why the Pacers kind of make sense, is because you get Buddy Hield, you have Grady Dick there, and like OG, there's like a pathway to, if you want to run Scottie at point and Jakob at the 5, like there's 3 shooters around him, and that's just like way more spacing than he was had in most of his lineups last year.
I like the Pacers deal, man. I like the Pacers deal.
Yeah, look, you're willing to give up Pascal Siakam for less than I was going to set up. I had like Jarris Walker going. I just felt like a fit, like you slide just Jarris Walker into the Pascal Siakam, really get a pick or two, and like let's be done with the heel. But Pacers fans were not about it, so that might be a good barometer for where they're also not a team that like we talk about the Thunder. They at least have the track record of making the Paul George trade. The Pacers just don't like.
Yeah,
I don't even know what their biggest midseason or biggest acquisition on the trade market would be. Probably did they sign Bojan Bogdanovic or did they trade for him?
Like, I think they signed him, or it was like sign and trade. Maybe I think it might have been.
I don't even remember, but like that would be in contention if that was like a sign and trade acquisition for their biggest. I mean, I guess you would count Victor Oladipo and Sabonis like as part of the Paul George trade. Like, is that their biggest acquisition? I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so. No, you're right. The Pacers are very risk averse as well.
I wanted to ask you about a few teams that I don't think, at least we haven't talked about them a ton this offseason on our podcast. I'll begin with the New Orleans Pelicans. They didn't really do much this offseason. You get Jordan Hawkins. We know that they're going to duck the tax at some point. It seems like they'll salary dump Kyra Lewis Jr. This is all going to amount to me just asking for your overarching impressions on all these teams after their offseason. Okay. But like, where are you on the Pelicans? Do you think they should have done more to like be more aggressive to diversify the front court spot next to Zion, or even just add even more shooting? What did you think of just their decision to sit relatively pat during the offseason?
Yeah, honestly, I'm still pretty confident in what they look like in November and December. I wrote a couple of pieces at that time just saying like how incredible they looked, both offensively. They were figuring out a system defensively which was very switch heavy, and they were just trying to limit points in the paint, but also being able to limit stuff on the perimeter. It just looked very, very good. And also Zion, I think it just comes down to health with these guys. And I hate that is the answer. I hate that I'm giving you that cop-out answer of saying this is just a health thing with these guys. But I think the amount of games Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, and Zion Williamson have played are in the single digits, like together. And I just, that's ridiculous to me. That's like a ludicrous stat. That doesn't make a lot of sense when you hear it out loud to yourself. So I think that's where I would go. It's like, can this team stay healthy? Because if they can, they are a surefire top 4, top 3 seed in the Western Conference next season. And they looked so good offensively built around Zion that I kind of trust it so much. I also believe in the development of their younger guys. I'm a huge Trey Murphy fan. I think he has, like we were talking about MIP with Precious. I think he's a pretty good pick for MIP for 2024 if you're being, a little fringy with your pick, if you want to say. But I like Trey just in general, just because he has shown an ability to create a shot a little bit more. He's an incredible shooter off the ball, obviously. And he's just like a long, rangy defender that works well in their system. I like Trey a lot. I think he can be their next guy,
I'm with you on Trey. I would wonder whether he'll get like the touches to explore the ball skills necessary, but it's not even just his shooting when he's not, dominating. That's just like the range that he had on his shooting. It's just like, you're going to stretch defenses paper thin. And so I'm with you on everything you said, where I still would have liked to have seen them been a little bit more aggressive to just try and open up the floor. And I think we're at the point where you might have to start planning around Zion's going to miss 30 games a year or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it's so tough because he's 23 and they were like the best team in the West at one point last year. And so you believe in the theory of this team. It's just so tough to imagine them. I mean, even looking at some of the time that Brandon Ingram has missed, you now have to factor in like the CJ McCollum learning curve. They might aging curve, excuse me. And then you're all of a sudden like, I don't love Jonas Valanciunas is a good player, but like, I don't know if he's going to close as part of your best lineups. And then like, you're going to reach like he's hitting free agency next year. And so it's like, so who is your big man there? Like, it's not Cody Zeller isn't going to be like the solution long-term. So I would have liked to have seen them been more aggressive, but they were so good when fully healthy that I was actually surprised. I think I saw some people name them as like the biggest losers of the offseason. And I'm just like, I can't get there because this team, if things just break even 75% right, where if we said Zion played in 57 games right now or 61, like I might be like, well, New Orleans is probably going to be like in the top 4 of the Western Conference. And a big part of that you mentioned too is not just Trey Murphy. The defense is just like we saw it in not even just last season, but Willie Green's first year. There's like a system in place, and they got really good in transition the year, not last year, but the previous year. They were a little bit worse last season. You mentioned the switching scheme worked for them in the half court. They're really good at ending possessions. I think Zion even improved on that end of the floor when you watch him a lot last year compared to years past. I remain bullish on their future, but I don't think it's unfair. It's not. I'm with you when it comes to health because Zion has missed like 2/3 of his career games. So it's not a cop out. That's a real thing. That's a
Yeah.
real concern.
It's also like, how do you reconcile that when you look at just their future and what they look like next season, the year beyond that? Like, how are you supposed to assess this team when it's constantly like, oh, by the way, injury, you know?
Right. I don't know how you're supposed to. And like
Yeah.
they were trying to make some assessments because you go out and make the CJ McCollum trade.
Yeah.
And so and we know like that they kind of poked around like the Malik Beasley sweepstakes at the last trade deadline. So I think it makes sense, I think, to run it back. And then if you need to make more wholesale decisions, even at midseason, because there has to be a bit of urgency. Just Zion is sort of this physical singularity. We don't know how long his prime window is going to last if he remains healthy. And so I do think you need to be more urgent. And I think there are real flaws on this team, but I'm also just like, what someone needs to point me to the move that they were supposed to make here.
Right.
And like, I'm not even a big fan of teams ducking the tax, but I'm like, what was the move that's going to be worth them spending more, taking on money in a trade? And I can't get there. And so I think like, as is, this is maybe a fringe contender if they stay healthy, if not an outright contender.
Yeah, some people brought up the idea of Dame, and then I know at the draft there was the idea of trading Zion for Scoot and kind of resetting that way. I just don't see those being viable options. Maybe you could sell me on the Dame idea if CJ gets rerouted to a third team, but I don't know. I just don't see that.
I like the Dame idea, and it would like it's just hard to build. Like Dyson Daniels is gone, and I really like Dyson Daniels. If he can like hit like a standstill jumper ever, he's going to be really good. But like you can't trade Herb right now, and he's so good. I just feel like he improved his shooting as the season went on, but it was like on like sub 2 attempts per game. It's like I need to see more volume out of him because I just wonder what he'll look like in longer playoff settings. But that's like I actually like Dame in New Orleans. If you find a third team for CJ and you're willing to unload the picks, they're just clearly a team that doesn't want to make that move, and I get it. I will say I was aboard. I became so high on Scoot that if you were going to flip Zion for Scoot, I think I was in the camp. I don't remember what I said, but if I was New Orleans and it was there, I probably would have done it.
Yeah, I'd have to think about it, but I'm pretty high on Scoot too, and I would at least entertain the idea. I love what Zion does, and like every time I think of trading Zion for Scoot, I think of the November and December Zion that we had last season, and I'm like, I don't know, man, that's an MVP candidate right there. Like, how do you trade that for a guy that you don't know, even though there are some assurances when seeing a guy like Scoot and what he can be in the future, but still, like, Zion is an MVP candidate. How are we going to move on from this guy? It feels like a tough pill to swallow
in a vacuum,
front office wise.
And I think even David Griffin said that the talks they had about number 3 never involved Zion. Who knows how true that is, but they clearly are thinking the way you're thinking.
Yeah.
The other team that feels weird to have on this list is the Knicks. Just sort of floating around out there. You signed Dante DiVincenzo, and that's like it. It's like 4 years, 46 million guaranteed or whatever it is.
Yep.
What do you make of their decision to sort of just like stand pat and add Dante DiVincenzo to what and trade Obi, of course?
Yeah. First of all, I feel like Obi didn't get a fair shot in New York, and him in Indiana just makes a lot of sense. Like we talked about Indy a little bit in passing here, but just the playmaking, the shooting around him, they're going to be a high octane offense. They're going to be running and gunning a lot. Indy's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and I think Obi will be a part of that. When it comes to adding Dante, it's just like another guy you can rely on the wings to guard people. He's a much more willing shooter than Josh Hart. And I think that's just part of like, hey, if Josh isn't shooting today, let's throw Dante into the lineup. And Dante was pretty good from what I remember last year. He was like a 40% shooter.
Yeah, he was really good from 3 last year.
Yeah. So like if he can keep that up, that's just another shooter that you can throw in there. The Knicks obviously needed a lot of shooting going into this offseason. I think that makes sense. They addressed something there. When it comes to like them staying pat, I just look at the situation in Philly and I'm like, all right, let's just hold down the fort until the big man decides to. That's where I'm at with New York. It just makes all the sense in the world. I don't know how it would ever happen. And if if Philly would be willing to play ball in that, but I just think you got to wait for Embiid, man.
The Joel Embiid trade request is coming. I think I didn't have a problem with what they've done so far because I think they're like, they need to get shooting. And it's like, they don't need shooting. They need shooting that cracks their closing lineup. Yeah. That was never going to happen unless you make a big trade. And so the Dante DiVincenzo signing is fine. I feel like they're still too small on the wings. Like I like Josh Hart and RJ Barrett at the forward for stretches, but like they need like a bigger wing who can also shoot. Again, they weren't going to get that for the mid-level exception. And so taking the flyer on Dante is fine, but he's not a caps lock shooter. He's like, as you mentioned, he's a good shooter. So I was going to ask you, like, is that when they're mentioned as the team that's going to go after the next megastar that becomes available, how do you view their actual asset pool at this point? Because I was having this discussion with someone who works at Knicks Film School the other day.
Yeah.
Their assets are kind of, to me, like some of the shine has dulled. Obi already went for 2 seconds. IQ's about, like, if you trade for him now or on his next contract, he's going to be
extension elsewhere, right?
Yeah. He's going to be making more money. And like, okay, you have your own first, and we can make the jokes like, oh, everyone wants a Knicks pick. But like, those picks aren't necessarily going to be good the way things are tracking right now. And then you have these extra firsts. Okay, Dallas, fine. That'll probably convey. But like the Detroit and Washington picks, those are not guaranteed to convey. And so I'm just wondering, like, yeah, you have RJ Barrett and Quentin Grimes, but do they even have, when you're looking at a team that might go after a Joel Embiid or like the next bigger name that becomes available, is their package are their best packages as enticing as I feel like it's been advertised, but we never go into specifics anymore because I feel like everyone knows a little, like, deep down, like, oh, like their best offers have kind of gotten worse.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. And you know what? I think if you look at the other packages out there, like other teams that could be able to cough up whatever for an Embiid type player, you look at OKC, you look at New Orleans. I mean, even technically Washington now or Brooklyn, like these teams have tons of picks, maybe some young guys that teams would be interested in. They have the salary to match. I think they would probably trump New York when it comes to just pure package to deliver. But then we don't live in that era where it's like, hey, this is just the best deal possible. We're going to send you here. We're looking at it with the Damian Lillard situation right now. It's like what his preferred destination is weighing heavily into where he might go because teams aren't sure whether he's going to be able to stay there. He's going to be happy, disgruntled, et cetera, et cetera. I think that might apply with Embiid as well. And if Embiid wants to be, or any other star really, wants to be in New York, then their package looks a little bit better. And you can maybe say, okay, well, you still get RJ Barrett, you still get Quentin Grimes, you still get whoever quickly. Right, you know what I mean?
I think a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
Market, man, the market just, it helps.
Is Joel Embiid, like, that's a player you kind of like, you would go just if you're the Knicks and he becomes like, you're going whole hog after him?
Yeah, I think he just, I mean, outside of the whole like cultural like ethos and Embiid being like in MSG thing, which is incredible by itself. I think the fit alongside Brunson, whoever you can keep with those guys, whether it's like a Hart, a DiVincenzo, it just makes a lot of sense. Like it just looks good. It seems like it would register properly in my head in terms of Brunson being able to create off of isolation possessions and Embiid being able to create off of isolation possessions, the pick and rolls that they would have, the dribble handoff stuff that they could work on. I just think it would be a near seamless fit. And New York would be maybe one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference almost immediately if that happens.
I think I'm with you. I prefer them to have like this bigger wing type player.
Yeah,
those players are just, even when we're trying to hunt for the next star that becomes available, that player doesn't seem to exist. Like I couldn't come up with. I tried to think about it. Like Embiid might be like even more so. I like Karl-Anthony Towns, not for this team, and I don't know why Tibbs and Towns would ever reunite for anything.
Right. Yeah,
I think it almost has to be Embiid unless they're waiting for Donovan Mitchell to become available again. And even that, you run into some weird small guard stuff with him and Brunson. So
what about
on Embiid? But I just don't know if he's like the guy. I just don't think the perfect guy is on. I mean, we're always surprised by what, but like I don't like, even if you're trying to think of way out there, I just can't find the bigger wing player that might request a trade soon.
So the only team I can think of, and this isn't request a trade, but it's like we've kicked the can down the road so many times that at some point we have to just reassess our options here, and that's the Clippers. And it's like you look at Paul George, you look at Kawhi. And those guys, especially with their age and where they're at contract-wise, they definitely won't cost as much as what Joel Embiid would. So maybe you can retain some of that quote-unquote asset pool and still be able to acquire a Kawhi, a Paul George, whoever that might be. And maybe that's your solution for your big wing, stretchy forward type,
Yeah, I will say whatever that rumored offer was that the Knicks apparently turned down for Paul George, I just won't buy it because I would have made that trade.
Fair enough.
It was just like, but I think, yeah, you're right. Those would be like that. That would be the team. Where do you land on the very quickly? Like I'm more of the Julius Randle's a very good player. I just think there's way too much overlap with him. And if you actually want RJ to develop into the player you're supposed to be, then having Jalen Brunson there, it feels like one of those three guys, not just in a bigger trade, but like just needs to go. And so I just don't see the theory of it.
Too many lefties, man. They're all on one side of the court. No, I'm kidding. I like Randle. I think he's gotten he's gotten a lot of hate over the last couple of years, and I think he's produced some really phenomenal seasons. He is still a flawed player in some senses. I think he can his playmaking and his passing has improved, but he still gets a little bit too indecisive when there's a double team coming his way. I think some of that stuff is very existent, especially in the playoffs. You can see that in the postseason, just his processing isn't there. It's, we compare Scottie Barnes to Julius Randle. It's like two different worlds in terms of processing speed. I think that's where I'm at with Julius. And yes, he is a good player. I think he can be a good player on a good team, but the questions about him maybe being your number one or number two or number three guy on a potential perennial playoff team, I don't know. How do you feel on that?
Oh, I'm team trade Julius Randle. I don't think it's
it's like, what do you trade him for?
That's the problem is he just had this all NBA season, and I don't really think that they could get a lot of value for him. And I don't think I'm pretty confident saying that the front office doesn't even want to trade him, but I'm also wondering how much of that is born from we don't think that we get a lot for him, and that'll just look like an absolute nightmare. But I'm with you. Just he makes, as your number one, there's a ceiling, and it's not very high. And then when you start to knock him down a peg or two, he's not always willing to do the stuff of a co-star or a running mate, and that's going to make it a very difficult fit. And his defense, quite frankly, this season was just for long stretches was just embarrassing.
Yeah,
and you're going to factor that in if you're a team that's acquiring him. Maybe because the money's not so obscene in this new cap climate. I just don't I think this is more of a situation where you're kind of letting years tick off his deal, and then he becomes valuable as there's only 2 years left on his deal, or he's an expiring contract, and you use him as more salary matching than any outgoing value, which is a tough spot to be because he just made all NBA. And I don't think it was egregious for him to make all NBA, but to be talking about this is just, and look, if you want to keep him, fine. But I just feel like with the RJ and the moments he had in the playoffs, it's you need to probably move on from him then, because Brunson's not going anywhere. And I just don't, the three of these guys together long-term put just this very finite cap on how good you can be on both ends of the floor, quite frankly.
I'm curious because, obviously New York, have to ask you, RJ, how do people feel about RJ in the New York sphere? Because I feel like he has a lot of believers. He also has a lot of doubters. Where do Knicks fans, Knicks media stand on RJ?
There's a lot of division. And I do think if I had to pick that it probably skews more pessimistic than optimistic. I'd just be curious to see, we talked about this with Scottie, and it's not as bad in New York. What would he look like with more spacing around him so that he can, when he was attacking in the playoffs, he looked phenomenal. And I still believe in his standstill jumper. I'm hoping this season we get to see him in a lot of smaller bench heavy lineups, maybe independent of at least Julius, but maybe even independent of Brunson as well. And so not to throw that team back out there, but him on the Pacers would make a lot of sense. It's just next to Tyrese Halliburton, and maybe gets to run some second units. And I hope for his career's sake that that he ends up leaving New York at some point, because even Utah would have been a great fit for him. Because I think that there's a really good basketball player in there, maybe a third best player on a phenomenal team. That's really hard to do. Some people take it as an insult. If he's going to reach that level in New York, I think there needs to be a real cosmetic facelift happening around him. And I just don't, again, we just went through it. I don't know
what the solution
Julius
is.
Randle, or if they want to move Julius Randle.
Yeah, it's kind of an either or thing with those guys. And I mean, I would lean trying to develop RJ versus trying to squeeze as much juice as possible out of Julius,
I've been begging for a teardown for 20 years. I would just rebuild and stuff. I just want the Knicks to go through a proper rebuild. So I would definitely skew more towards that. I will say, to wrap them up, and I don't know if you agree, I think what they did this past season, maybe it's because of Brunson, feels more sustainable than that Julius Randle most improved player. I don't expect them, even if they're a little worse when looking at the wins and losses, I expect this team to basically sustain what it was able to do this past year.
I think I've said this a lot, and I've had to cover the guy, but Jalen Brunson reminds me a lot of Kyle Lowry. And it's not just because of the way that they play and the way that they do things, but the wins added perspective, the stability perspective. I think he just has a level of, hey, we're going to squeeze 42, 43, 44 wins out of the season, regardless of what the scenario is. And I think that applies to Brunson as well. Like he has a way about him in the regular season, even in the playoffs. Like he was phenomenal until he got banged up. But I just think he's that type of player. He brings a level of stability to that team. They've been dying for a point guard for such a long time. Shout out to Raymond Felton. That's like one of my, yeah, I had to. He's like, every time I think of Knicks point guards, like the grave of Knicks point guards, I think of Raymond Felton. But yes, there's so many others that we could talk about.
I think of the Stephon Marbury, Steve Francis backcourt.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah. There's so many. There's Pablo Prigioni. There's
the king of this podcast, Frank Ntilikina. I believe.
I saw a baby with a Frank Ntilikina jersey on. I was like, why did you give that baby a Frank Ntilikina jersey?
Because they care about that child's future. So the next team I have is Orlando. And how did you feel about how did you feel about Anthony Black's fit? Like, did they add enough shooting with Joe Ingles and Jet Howard is who they have? Like, did they add enough shooting to make that work? Because it was such a magic pick where it's like, hey, let's take the really big guy who with a questionable jumper, and we already might have enough of those dudes. Like, how do you feel about the kind of roster setup right now?
I was wary of the Ant Black fit first, but seeing him in summer league, I'm a little bit more confident in how that looks, just because of how big he is. You kind of have to contextualize how big these guys are once you see them in person, and you're like, oh, whoa, Anthony Black is way bigger than I thought he would actually be. So yeah, I just think the size makes a lot of sense in that lineup. I think they can be a pretty good defensive team next season if some of that buy-in is there between Suggs and Markelle Fultz, and just from a point of attack perspective, they can be a really, really good defensive team. So I see it from a defensive perspective. Offensively, I can understand the worries shooting wise. I think Jet Howard is a great shooter, phenomenal. I was surprised they didn't take Grady Dick, and I think a lot of Toronto Raptors fans are also surprised they didn't take Grady Dick, but Jet can be a great shooter. Great off-ball mover. He fits with what they do. I think they do have to address their log jam at the guard spot at some point this season. And I know Cole Anthony is up for an extension. I know Markelle I think he's inked on for a couple more years. But what are you going to do to make sure all these guys get their touches, especially with Ant Black in the lineup now? It's like, how do you promote the growth of Suggs, Black, and essentially all the other guards that they have in Fultz? And you know what I mean? I just don't know how you are able to just get enough usage for all of those guys. And then also have to worry about Franz and Paolo and Wendell Carter Jr. It's just like, how do you manage all those responsibilities? At some point, it feels like a consolidation is coming with those guys.
Yeah, and the front line, they're lucky because everyone you named on the front line, WCJ, Paolo Banchero even, and then Franz Wagner's very scalable. So they can work in all these different situations. You have Fultz entering his contract year, so you're going to have to he's extension eligible, I think. So you have to make a decision on him. You mentioned Cole Anthony. I have on the list. I am a very big believer in Jalen Suggs, they were like a top 10 defense for most of last year. Yeah. And the assignments that he was tackling during that stretch were he was a monster. And he started shooting well from three on real volume towards the latter half, or even for most of the season, including from above the break. So if he can sort of get his bearings, become a quicker decision maker with the ball and maybe not as sloppy when he's heading downhill, there's an outline of not just, oh, okay, this guy can play, a really, really good player. And it adds to the logjam. I'm with you that I wanted them to make a consolidation trade this summer because I thought they kind of they don't have a lot of wings on this team if you view Ant Black as a primary facilitator, and you have Franz Wagner, and then that's kind of it. Now you have Joe Ingles, but he's a trillion years old. Yeah. I'm still so intrigued by them. I just don't think people who I trust and who are smarter than me have told me that Jet Howard is just ready. I know very little about Jet Howard, so I'll trust that. I still just don't think, when you look at their best lineups, they're still dealing with a bottom 5 half-court offense last season. I don't know if they've improved enough. Even when you cake in, okay, Paolo Banchero is just going to be better because that dude, he is that dude. I think when you watch him, everyone agrees. I just don't have a lot of faith in the offensive advancement this season with this exact crop of personnel.
To me, they seem like a good team to do a Karl Anthony Towns trade. And that's down the road. But that makes sense to me from you can get a couple of guards going to Minnesota. You maybe get, I don't know, a pick or two. I don't know what the deal would essentially be, but like fit wise, I think that would work really, really well next to Paolo and Franz.
I would like that. I would not like, we mentioned it before, I don't like Siakam in Orlando. It's
Yeah,
just like, it
yeah,
would be a very Orlando trade. Like everyone wants them to get a guard or like a really high volume shooter, and they go get Pascal Siakam. Maybe they even like, they just get involved in the OG Anunoby sweepstakes, and that's
yeah,
the way
yeah.
that they improve their shooting. I floated them as a Damian Lillard destination. Like consolidate. Orlando Magic fans were not about it. They were just like, no. And I know rebuilding teams and their fans get attached to their young players, but
Yeah.
maybe that it's probably too soon to talk about that, but it is coming with this roster when you look at the setup. And like they have all of these, it's OKC-ish in the sense that all these guys are really good. Like I do think Magic fans tend to be too high on Markelle Fultz. Like, yes, he can take mid-rangers, but this isn't someone who actively spaces the floor for you. Still.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's a defensive monster and he can set up your offense. And we'll see how Anthony Black works. I think if you can carve out enough spacing, like the idea of having him, Wagner, Ben Caro is just like, that's pretty terrifying. Like as a looking at their future outlook.
They're good. Do you think they're a play-in team next year? Do you think they crack the top 10 in the East?
Oh man, I haven't even like who else is in the East? I guess if we're gonna write
Yeah, I know. I don't know.
The Raptors out of it, to like Bucks, Celtics, Cavs, Knicks probably aren't going anywhere. Heat, so that's 5 teams.
Mm-hmm.
But like we don't know the Sixers. Like I guess do we just throw them in there? Like what is
going on? I guess I don't know. Yeah, it's there's so much uncertainty, but I could see them at least flirting with a top 10 spot next year. I mean, they almost were last year, except they kind of let go of the rope at the end of the season. I think they're ready for that. There's a lot of the offensive stuff they need to address shooting wise. I wonder if some stability with like the Ingles and Jet Howard, just like having extra shooters out there provides them offensively. But yeah, I could see this team squeezing out like, I don't know, 40 wins. I could see that. I wouldn't be surprised at that.
I think their defense will be good enough to do it. Yeah. And like, if we're just writing off, I mean, the Hornets are still the Hornets. Yeah. I don't know if the Pistons are ready. The Wizards are going to be worse by design. And it seems like the Raptors might be tracking in that direction. So you've got 4 of the 5 teams that you need to kind of beat out to get in that discussion already. So yeah, I don't think that's spicy at all. I think my co-host Grant said they were going to make the playoffs.
Ooh,
I'm not there yet. I'm not there.
I don't know. I can't do that. I could commit to OKC being top 6. If you want, we could talk about OKC being top 6.
I'm with you on OKC, which is just like it runs counter. I want them to make this big trade, but like they just might be really good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming you watch Chet in person at Summer League. Like he just adding that rim protection and then like the floor space that they have is just going to be like I'm curious. I haven't looked at. Do you know what their over under is at? Like I might just smash the over even if it's 43.
I feel like it's like around there, 42, 43 and a half. I don't know. I haven't checked, but I'd imagine it's 42 or 43 and a half. Let me see. OKC Thunder over under. I'm actually curious now.
Yeah, there were like people who floated like, could they get to 50 wins? I was like, I would be shocked, but I wouldn't be like dismayed if you told me it happened. I'd be like, all right.
Yeah, 43 and a half is what they're at right now.
I think I would take the over.
Yeah, I would too.
They're ready. Yeah, they'll be all right. So we have it. S and Dan are booking OKC for top 6 in the West this season. Let me run through at least one more team before I let you go. So the Grizzlies made headlines with Marcus Smart earlier in the offseason. They have not made headlines since. Yeah. Are they better than they were last year? Like, let's fast forward to Ja Morant. The suspension's over after 25 games. Yeah. Are they better?
I absolutely think they're better. You won't find someone who's higher on the Marcus Smart trade than me. Genuinely, I think like I still am questioning it from Boston's perspective. I'm not even talking about the heart and soul thing. Like, yeah, okay, we can talk about how Smart is impacting that team and et cetera, et cetera. I just think from relying on Kristaps Porzingis for a championship contender perspective, that's a question I have. I get they're better. I understand. And I think like they can be a more switch heavy team on defense. They have more rim protection, et cetera, et cetera. But I just don't get it. Anyways, you asked me about Memphis. I have to.
Well, you're right on the Celtics. I guess their ceiling might be higher, but like they lost playmaking and they already didn't have a ton of that. And they lost defensive versatility because Kristaps cannot switch like Marcus Smart can. So they had like one of the more, it's been painted as a success, but it feels like one of the riskier.
It is risky. You know? And like, I just think the Celtics were so one-dimensional shot diet wise. Like they were so reliant on the 3 ball. And now you have a guy in Kristaps Porzingis who is just doubling down on that theory instead of trying to diversify what this team is offensively. It leaves a lot of questions from Boston's perspective. I understand they might win the most amount of regular season games next year. I wouldn't be surprised at that. But I think moving forward, postseason wise, looking at that, I don't know how you rely on a guy like KP.
I think that's totally fair. It's if he has a season like he did last year, sure.
Yeah.
It's just we have a track record of all these lower body injuries with him.
On Memphis' side of things, I absolutely love it. I mean, you have a guy in Marcus Smart who can play up defensively a little bit. Like he's not going to do it all the time, but he can guard your threes. He's good in the post as a defender. He can try to guard your fours or at least switch out onto your fours. I am still wondering how it works offensively. And I think that's the biggest question. Like, how are you going to provide as much shooting as possible? Like Smart can knock down a three, but he's not necessarily getting, he's not getting a hard closeout. You know what I mean? To run him off. Yeah.
He won't get like the Andre Robertson treatment like Dylan Brooks does in the playoffs. But you're right that like even when you look at the catch and shoot numbers over the past few seasons, like Dylan Brooks has been a more efficient catch and shoot shooter than Marcus Smart.
Yeah, exactly. I think like they could be the best team in the NBA defensively, but the offensive questions still loom. I feel like they actually might have got a little bit better half court wise just because of the creation juice that Marcus Smart brings, just like the connective passing. It makes a lot of sense to me from what they are as a team offensively, but I like them. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a team that we look back on next year and we're like, wow, this Smart trade really completed them in a lot of ways. I still think they need a little bit of wing help, but overall, I love the trade for them.
So I kind of despised it. And
really,
it's with the caveat that I agree with everything you said. It felt like they were trying to check too many boxes with one player. And that if you were going to do that, the player shouldn't have been Marcus Smart because we know that they needed a wing.
Yeah.
And then if you're giving up Tyus Jones, you needed playmaking. If you were letting Dylan Brooks walk, you needed the defense and you needed kind of shooting to begin with. And so like Marcus Smart kind of fills all of those areas, but he doesn't actualize a ton of them. And it felt like a lot of it's going to be supplementation rather than, hey, we upgraded the roster where it's okay. Did they really? Maybe I think I'm with you that they upgraded their playmaking element a little bit just because he's a little bit more chaotic off the dribble than a Tyus Jones, who's more of a game manager.
Yeah.
But you lost the best backup point guard in the NBA. It's like, okay, it works that Marcus Smart is coming, but what is the upgrade like defensively from Dylan Brooks? Maybe it's pretty substantial, but what is the upgrade as a shooting? Is that substantial? And then you're still, I would say, if you answer all those in the affirmative, that, okay, they upgraded those three areas in one player. Like you still just need another wing because you're going to skew smaller if you're going to try and play Marcus Smart in some of these combinations with Desmond Bane and John Morant. Now, and part of the appeal of Marcus Smart is you can play him with Desmond Bane and John Morant. You couldn't do that with Tyus Jones. But again, that's just sort of putting a Band-Aid over, well, that was what Dylan Brooks was doing. And so how much better is Marcus Smart than Dylan Brooks for you in the playoffs? I think it's material. It's measurable. But like that was your move. And it just felt a little too lateral. Like they might be a little bit better, but it's incrementally. And this team has been itching, I think, for a big swing. With the caveat before I throw it to you, I've been wrong about the Grizzlies. This would be the fourth season in a row. Like I just keep hitting their under and they keep just making me look like an idiot. So Grizzlies fans should actually appreciate me saying all of this.
Yeah, fair enough. I think they were a prime destination if the Raptors were to explore it to go for a guy like OG Anunoby. He would have very much so completed what they needed from the wing spot. Obviously that's not the case and they don't have, but like someone like that would have matched or optimized whatever the Grizzlies would have been a lot more than Marcus Smart. I agree on that perspective. I just think postseason wise, I am trusting Marcus Smart over Dylan Brooks. And I think that makes, like you said, a material difference in any given playoff series. That's like at a surface level, that's how I'm looking at it.
And I might be underestimating Jared Jackson and Desmond Bane are not finished products, maybe. Like those are two guys that could still, and they have some of these other young, like Santi Aldama I really like, but like Jared Jackson Jr. or Desmond Bane, like both of those guys could just like pop, which is weird to say about the reigning defensive player of the year, but it's like Desmond Bane just got a max extension because he was worth it. It's like he might not be done growing. So I recognize that. Are there any of the teams that we're not going to be able to get to, looking at the Pistons, the Bucks, the Hornets, and the Timberwolves, that you wanted to hit before I
Yeah,
let you
you
release
know
you?
what? I'll talk about the Pistons a little bit because I feel like
Love
I'm
it.
higher on them than other people just in general. I think the way Cade is going to open things up for Jaden Ivey and the way Jaden Ivey is going to open things up for Cade Cunningham is going to work really, really seamlessly. Some people are still like lower on Cade in general because he missed the season, and I think that's just sort of a recency bias thing. You don't see something, so you don't know what's happening. But I still believe in Cade. I think he's going to be a good player. I like their backcourt. From the summer league, at least from what we saw, I love Asar Thompson just as a defensive player, a guy who can slot in right there as a defensive wing for them. They've been desperate for that type of player. That's why they were trying to go after a Cam Johnson type in free agency. I love Jalen Duren. I think he's a great like roll big. He can make some short roll passes. I think the Isaiah Stewart extension was pretty good money. I think he works well for their system. They still have a ways to go, but I like what they're building foundationally and how it could look in the next couple of seasons, especially if one of Cade or Ivy or maybe both of them pop in a real big way.
Yeah, I'm hopeful with the way that Ivy, I think, improved as an off the dribble shooter and decision maker as the season went on. And I saw, like, there are people that are like, oh, you had all this cap space, you turned into Monte Morris and Joe Harris. I'm like, that's really good. Like, you weren't going to get Cam Johnson, clearly. Like, people were framing it as, oh, they helped the Nets keep Cam Johnson. It's like, the Nets were going to keep Cam Johnson. That's why you make that deal. They needed spacing. So between those two guys, Alec Burks, Bojan Bogdanovic, I like what they did. I'm so high on Cade. And I have more belief in Asar Thompson's jumper than I do Amen Thompson's jumper. And
I agree.
Yeah. Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
That's just my very like surface level. Haven't seen a lot of these guys, but watching them, and they both just might be really good. So I love kind of a lot of the perimeter pieces they have in place. My one concern, and I don't have a problem with the Isaiah Stewart extension, is like, I don't really love like this too big setup that it seems like they're still married to a little bit. Maybe Monty Williams gets them away from that, where they don't view as like, oh, okay, we don't need to play Stewart X amount of minutes, or we don't need to play Marvin Bagley at all. And I don't know where they're at on the James Wiseman, who like fine for them rehabilitation project. But like some of their not just best lineups in terms of winning, but best lineups in terms of developing like Cade, Jaden Ivey, or Asar Thompson, to me is like if Bojan is at the 4 and like you're kind of fleshing, okay, Joe Harris is on the court with him, or maybe Alec Burks is, in addition to then two or three of those young guys. And I'm wondering whether they will get to that setup enough to like streamline the development of their most important players is just my biggest concern there.
No, I hear you. I think Monty's system in general, what we've seen, what he did in Phoenix and before that in New Orleans, like his system is predicated on tons of ball movement and off ball movement. So maybe you can get away with playing double big lineups if those guys are consistently shifting and moving. Like there's a world in which that works, but I agree with you. Not in the same realm of Orlando where they have to consolidate their bigs and go get something else, but like they might have to shift things around just to add some roster balance at some point. And maybe that happens with Bojan. I know every year it seems like we're like, oh yeah, Bojan Bogdanovic is going to get traded. Maybe this is the year that happens. I don't know.
Yeah, it was only a 1-year extension he signed, right? Or is there a team option still on his deal? I can't even remember at this point.
I think
he does have a team option, or non-guaranteed. So, I mean, he's a caps lock scorer. So that works. Is there any really like, do you trust any of the dual big lineups? I think it has to be like Duren and Stewart is probably like, I don't want to see Wiseman with another big at all. Like,
exactly. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think Duren and Stewart makes a lot of sense, especially with Stewart trying to expand his game a little bit and step out to the 3-point line. Like, I don't know how successful that's been, but the fact that he's willing to do that, like, I think that makes sense. At least you have someone that is potentially going to stretch the floor for you.
I just trust guys that look like they work really hard when they're on the floor. And that's what Isaiah Stewart is. Like even if he's not even doing the right things and I'm not watching close, like it's like that dude looks like he's trying. So I'm just going to believe in him.
Yeah, I agree.
S, this was great. Thank you for giving me so much of your time. Are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you do?
Yeah, appreciate you, man. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Just follow me on Twitter. You see the thing. If you're on YouTube, you can watch the little Just S Baraheni thing. Or you can just follow me on Twitter at Just S Baraheni. Go and check it out. Appreciate you guys.
A fantastic Twitter follow covers one of the reasons I still log on Twitter. I do not tweet as much anymore, but one of the people whose tweets you definitely want to read. I will definitely be pestering you again in the future. So thank you so much for coming on, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate it, man. Hey, let me know when a Pascal trade is happening, and we'll jump on again. I got you.